Welcome to another Public Square Conversation. I'm Alan C. Duncan with Dave Zanotti, Rob Walgate, Dr. Jeff Sanders, and Sherry Eisen. There's a lot going on at the American Mission Center here at the start of a new year. So let's talk about it for a bit. Here's Dave.
Every month we do an update. Rob, you and I have been talking about this for a long time here at the Public Square. We do an update from the American Policy Roundtable, which is in essence the parent company, the 501c3, that is the hosting agency for the Public Square Radio Network, which is now coast to coast and lots of different products. Recently, we did a little bit of analysis on how many radio products or podcast products or long-form audio broadcast products will produce out of this little shop in 2024. And the projection right now is for something in the neighborhood of 1,193, I think is the number.
Yeah, but I have no doubt we will eclipse that number because we're making that projection in the first month of 2024.
Yeah.
What do you think, Dunk? Come the third month or the fourth month, we're going to be like, hey, we need to do this, or we have this content for this.
Do you know how many ideas were thrown around in our staff meeting this morning? I mean, if we just did those ideas, I think we'd eclipse it. But yeah, I think everyone was kind of surprised when we actually stopped and counted the shows. It was kind of one of those, you can't think about it too long. It's good to know. It's like, don't look down. You know, it's just kind of just keep moving.
Yeah, exactly. And if people knew how small the budget and how small the staff was that actually creates all of that, you'd understand that there is still a miracle working God who does the miracle of the loaves and fishes every single day.
Every day.
And that's what this broadcast is really all about. And I'm sure there are listeners who can attest to that in their lives and in their corporations and in their ministries and their families, that whatever you give to God, whatever you put in his hands, because you feel called to do so, he takes and he uses and he multiplies it. Now, sometimes you don't live to see the multiplication of it. Doesn't mean he's not doing it. And that's the wonder. We're not responsible for results. What we're responsible for is what's put in our hand. So I want to talk about this last monthly update that went out because we did a radio show on it not so long ago called the General and Mr. Biden. The general, of course, was General Washington. Around our house, that's the general. There's only one. It's George Washington. Everybody else is kind of a general and is greatly respected, but there's only one, the general. And the general and Mr. Biden, the president of the United States decided in his speech at Valley Forge to get very historical and to tell a story which ended up in the long run sort of being like putting a lot of words and a lot of facts into George Washington's life that honestly aren't there. Now, everybody's got the right to their own version of history, and the president of the United States can say whatever he wants to say. He doesn't stand in judgment on me. On Judgment Day, I won't be the one casting a vote, and I'll be looking for mercy on Judgment Day like everybody else. But there is a point in which the president of the United States, I think, has a certain obligation to their predecessors. And certainly every president of the United States has taken great deference to the character of George Washington. He was called first in our nation, and I wrote a book about that called First, the leadership of George Washington. He was called first because he was first, and no one's ever eclipsed the level of sacrifice, commitment, and precedence that George Washington's established. So it's kind of a touchy subject when you go to George Washington because you want to get it right. I can tell you that because writing a book on George Washington, even a brief book like the book that I wrote, required endless editorial readings from history professors at all different levels because you don't want to get it wrong. You really don't want to get it wrong. What's refreshing about George Washington is there are so many of his original writings that are available that you can actually do your homework and let the general speak for himself.
Well, I do have to ask, though, and you talk about all those writings, so because obviously hundreds of people, if not thousands, have written on Washington through the years.
Yeah, multiple thousands.
Did you ever come into it where there was a bit of a contrast or a bit of a difference, and you had to even go deeper in the fact of someone said this happened in this way, and someone countered that with something, and you're like, wait a minute here. 5 people said this, one person said this. What's going on
Sure.
here?
Yeah, and you really do, because there's an entire apocryphal set of writings about Washington that even from not so long after his passing, people were writing mythologies about Washington. And
Parson
they had,
Weems.
yeah, Parson Weems, they had to be debunked, right, Jeff? I mean, over history.
Right. I cannot tell a lie. George Washington, the cherry tree, yet did not happen. Sorry to disappoint you.
Throwing a silver dollar across the Potomac, yeah, no,
Right.
no. So there is a mythology, and there are people who are also out of control. They deify a man who never, in any way, shape, or form, pretended to be perfect or God. George Washington knew above all the needs in his life, what he needed most was a savior. So there's no one's pretending that Washington is perfect.
And so many of his writings, which you were able to study, and we've all been able to study and look at, that was one benefit of all. He wrote so much.
Yeah.
I mean, you're at a time, I still can't fathom that. Thinking about that time, just thinking about
Longhand.
Longhand.
No word processor.
Just not even that, just the method of communication. Dave just asked us at the beginning of this program to pull up our phones. I had my computer up, it died, but he wanted us to look at an email to start the program. Well, I pull it up. I have 13 unread text messages because my children aren't in school today and my wife's not in school. So I'm on, and I'm like, they've communicated with me that much in under an hour. And we're talking about the day where the communication is, I'm going to write this 8-page letter. When will I get a response?
We've got something like 20 volumes of his writings on site here. I mean, it's amazing. And they're thick books, too. The guy was a prolific writer.
It might be more like 30 volumes.
30? Okay, I didn't count.
It's a lot. I think.
Okay, maybe 30.
Yeah, one of the things about Washington that people don't know about, and it goes into this whole conversation about right now the presidential campaign is being stoked by a narrative of language that says that our democracy is at stake. Our democracy is at stake. Now, this is not about politics. This is about history. We're not afraid of politics. We just recognize that there are some things that are bigger than politics. So the question that's being raised in this campaign from all circles is over the word democracy. And people would very much like us to fall into the historical mythology that America is, ever was, or was supposed to be a democracy. Now, in the newsletter, we actually address that question. We address it in just 3 brief pages, we address it from a multiple number of points to show from the historical record that this is not the case. And one of we just ran out of space in the newsletter, so we wanted to come back to this, to something that's called historically the quasi-war. And it ties in with the idea of whether or not George Washington was in the field of battle and lived his 45 years of service to his country for the cause of democracy, when in fact at the end of his life he was ready to go to war against the very idea of democracy. So we're not making this stuff up. So let's go back and look at the facts. General Washington, of course, served as commander-in-chief, and the war was won with a great amount of help from the French. And George Washington retired from service and public life and gave his sword and his commission back over to the United States Congress, from which the authority to be commander-in-chief had emanated. This is before we had a country. So this was the Continental Congress, the Union of the States in a confederated republic, and he went off to retire forever. That was his goal. Now, before he left the field of battle, he wrote an article called, a document, which became an article, called the Circular to the States, in which he described the 4 pillars upon which he believed the American form of government should be built going forward. None of them included the word democracy. Well, we know what happened. Washington went back to Mount Vernon. People came to him and said, we have to have a constitutional convention. He refused to go. He consorted and consulted with them on what it ought to look like, but he refused to go. Finally, they said, if you don't show up, we're not going. So he went. We know what happened. The Constitutional Convention met. They passed the document. It was ratified. We now have a country, a united country, and a constitutional form of a Republican form of government. And the general was asked to come and serve his country again as president, which he did. He tried to quit after 4 years. They wouldn't let him. So he ran again, was elected unanimously the second time, and then walked away from power again, went back to Mount Vernon. And the story's supposed to be over there. Less than 3 years later, he passed away. But in that brief period of months before he did pass away, President Adams came back knocking on his door, asking him to once again return to public service as commander-in-chief. And Jeff, I bet you know what country they were asking him to defend us against.
Yeah, it was France, which was going through its its revolution. Started in 1787 or 1789, depends on how you want to look at it. And, they were all for democracy. They were for really mob rule, and it resulted in a lot of bloodshed. And the Americans, during the Adams presidency, signed a treaty with Great Britain, finalizing some of the details of the borders between Canada and the United States and things like that, and also regulating trade and normalizing trade relationships between the United States and Great Britain. Well, the French, still going through their revolution, and this is after they got rid of their king, this is before Napoleon became the dictator and emperor, they were outraged. They said, we don't want the United States being friendly with Great Britain. So through a long process and trying to manipulate our own politics, it resulted in what we now call the quasi-war with France. And their warships started picking on our trade ships, and then we sent our warships out there. It wasn't really a quasi-war to the sailors who were getting blown to bits and the ships that were being sunk. But we actually fought the French for a period of about 2 years, from 1798 or 3 years to the year 1800. Before that was finally settled, Napoleon came to full power there in France, and he said, no, we don't want to mess with the United States. We've got other countries we want to deal with.
And there's a key moment in that quasi-war we're going to talk about when we come back.
All right, let's do it. We'll take our break and be right back for more of Public Square.
We'll be right back for more on the Public Square. Every day, 535 people are charged with representing all of us in Washington, D.C. They preside over the largest budget in the world. They hold the Constitution in their hands. They can help protect our liberties or look the other way. 535 people. We put them in office. Isn't it time that we hold them in our prayers? A public service message from the American Policy Roundtable. Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to the Public Square.
Back around the table with the team, getting a refresher on some military history involving George Washington that's not often discussed. Here's Dave.
So we've got a quasi-war with France. How bipolar that must have been for the United States. It was France that helped us become a nation. In the alliance between Lafayette and Washington, and the battle and the victory at Yorktown, and the friendship between those two men. I mean, they had relatives that named children after each other. Right. I mean, these were people who were close friends and associates. And now all of a sudden the United States is saying, we're going to war because, and the very thought of this is incredible, because the last thing the United States wanted to do was to go to war with any European power.
We were too weak.
The last power they would want to go to war with was France, right? I mean, we're the new kids on the block.
Right.
We have the Marines, yes, but we don't have a whole lot else. We don't have a whole lot of ships. We don't have a whole lot of money. We don't have a large standing army. So this was an extraordinary situation. And it gets even wilder when you read the history, because President Adams knew that for us to be able to prosecute this war, we were really prosecuting a system of government that France was initiating that was turning into an unregulated, unconstitutional reign of terror. It was an infectious mob rule approach, and the United States wanted nothing to do with a government that would be in that form of government, and that form of government they defined as democracy. It was mob democracy. You will find the founders across the board all looking at what France was doing, starting with a godless proposition and moving to a concept of democracy and the rule of the mass as nothing but a mess.
Dave, didn't Thomas Jefferson flirt with democracy for a while? And he was very friendly at first with the French Revolution.
Spent a lot of time in France.
Yeah. And he was fluent in French and had a lot of friends there. But as time progressed and he saw what happened in France, he then disavowed himself entirely of the whole concept of democracy.
He did, without a doubt. So they got it. Now, the wild part of this story, and when I first read this, I can't tell you how many times I fact-checked this, and it was years ago, because I couldn't believe it, and I was looking at it in history books. So George Washington is trying to take care of business and bring his beloved Mount Vernon up out of the ashes, because he spent 45 years in the service of his country, and from the time he inherited that property, he never had time to make it profitable. And so he's hoping to live a good number of years in retirement to bring the whole thing back into some form of fiscal integrity. And he gets a knock on the door, and it's the President of the United States asking the former president, would he come back into service as commander-in-chief, because if, in fact, Congress is going to declare war on France, and it's about to happen, we've got a uniform waiting for you, and you're the only commander-in-chief that we will accept. This actually happened. You can go to the site at Mount Vernon. You can actually go onto the Mount Vernon's website, and we actually link that in our monthly update. And you can hear historian Ron Chernow talking about this. Now, you know Chernow because of the book Hamilton and because of the hit musical Hamilton. And so he chronicles this. Of course, Washington came back, and it was crazy. There's no way. He said yes. But his condition was Alexander Hamilton had to run it. That was the deal. Washington would be commander-in-chief, but the workload would fall to Alexander Hamilton. Now, that in and of itself is an amazing story.
It is. And when I think about this, and we're talking about this time, it also brings into play for me the age of these guys as they're having these discussions, as they're forming this union, this constitutional republic, and the age they are and the things they've seen. I mean, some young guys in the room.
You know why he picked Hamilton? Hamilton at the Siege of Yorktown personally led a nighttime bayonet charge against the British in one of their redoubts. He knew that Hamilton was a very courageous man. Besides being intellectual, he could handle it.
And Washington stuck by Hamilton for his whole life. Washington is a good bit older than Hamilton. Hamilton was, in essence, an orphan who came here to America without any pedigree. And by service and accomplishment, he won Washington's confidence. And even when Hamilton ran into serious questions in his life, he had a problem in his marriage. He not only was he unfaithful, he ended up publishing a brochure about it. I mean, it was the kind of thing where it was a messy scandal. And through the midst of all that public embarrassment, George and Martha Washington did not forsake their friendship and their relationship with Alexander Hamilton. George Washington, the general, he was an amazing person. Well, he said yes, and the uniform was there, and we call it now the quasi-war with France because it never turned out to be a full-blown war declared by Congress, etc. So it was known as the quasi-war. But it's one last evidence that even George Washington would come out of retirement and be willing to come back as commander-in-chief and put his life at risk along with Hamilton's because we did not want to be connected in any way, shape, or form with democracy. Now, I'm guessing that maybe Joe Biden, the president of the United States, hasn't seen Hamilton, or he didn't read Chernow's book, or he hasn't been to Mount Vernon, but somewhere along the line, he really tried to bend the curve of history from Valley Forge and to put words in the general's mouth that weren't there. And we're just calling it for what it is. We'd like the record to be clear. Now, somebody says, well, so what? Well, it does matter. Was that a veiled way of entering the political campaign? No. I'm just talking about the general. We have an entire library at the American Mission Center with thousands of volumes of books. And one of the anchor authors in that library is one of the world's experts on political philosophy and the life of George Washington. That's W.B. Allen. And he gave us the books for our library that he literally, with his own hands, read through every document to create the book on Washington's writings that's been on sale at Mount Vernon since the 1980s. We went to the world's best experts, and words matter, and concepts matter, and these thoughts matter. So that's why we bring it up, because we want to get the record straight. Now, if you don't have a doctorate in political philosophy, or you don't get the privilege of doing what we do every day at the American Mission Center, which is to try to help make a difference here, we want you to understand you're still on the team. This isn't a conversation that we're having above your head so that people could say, well, look, they won an argument, or they're smarter than the average bear, or smarter than somebody else. Who cares? The question is, this is America, and we all are vested here. What we would like to make certain today is that you have a copy of the monthly update that in 4 brief pages covers this and gives you the links to all the articles that we're talking about, so you can read it for yourself and you can share it with a friend. It doesn't cost a thing to get the monthly update. It is not a fundraising letter. We do not do massive solicitations on this. Every now and then we'll talk about projects we're working on and invite you to participate if you like. But it's a document that we basically are teaching each other, trying to get smarter all the time and share it with other people to help you become a change agent as well. Rob, if they want to get a copy, how do they do so?
They can visit us online at aproundtable.org or thepublicsquare.com and let us know. You can let us know you'd like to receive the monthly update. We can send it to you via the United States Postal Service, or we can send it to you in your email and your inbox so you can forward to others, or we can do both, whichever you prefer.
People can also sign up for it through our app as well.
Yes.
If you grab our phone app, it's also accessible through that. So that's another thing. Recommend everybody sign up for the Public Square.
Alan, that's great. Thank you for bringing that up, because you can have all of our broadcasts. Well, almost all. Well, actually, you can have about half our broadcasts, because now there's 1,193 of them. But you can get access to a whole lot of our broadcasts on the phone app. And you can get special access if you're on this mailing list for the monthly update to certain programs that we only send out to people that are on the monthly update.
Yeah, someone did a deep dive into the archives listening to their show. And I guess they forgot they went in the archives, because I walked into church yesterday morning and someone brought up a topic that we discussed on the Public Square, and it just it caught me off guard, and I wasn't ready for exactly that topic. And they said, I heard you talking about it. I'm like, thinking back, like, when did we talk about that? And they're like, oh, I just heard it. And I'm like, where were you listening? Like, which radio station played that? And they looked and said, you know what? I was on the app and I was looking for something that dealt with that. And it was in the archives. Now that I think about it, it wasn't a recent show. So it kind of like took me by surprise a little bit. It was about an election from years ago. And I'm like, I don't think we covered that recently, but they wanted to hear something about it. So they went and looked.
Wow, so we got to be on our toes, apparently.
Yeah. Well, and while not everyone can come to the American Mission Center and walk through the thousands of volumes of the library here, the library on the Public Square flows from many of those authors and many of these conversations. And so this is kind of a audio library for you, and you can have access to it. So what are you trying to do? Well, we're trying to build this radio network, knowing that there's only so many stations, there's only so many dollars, but there's a lot of people who can become their own radio station and make a tremendous impact.
And I think one of the important things in this is that we are always interested in presenting historical integrity. We don't want to manipulate the truth. We want to look at exactly what it is, which is why the library that we have is so extraordinary.
And thank you, Sherry, and why we've positioned ourselves in such a place that we don't endorse candidates, we take no money from candidates, and we do not take money from political parties. They both dislike us on any given day about the same. Because we're not playing the party game. We're talking, not politics, we're talking about history.
And again, if you would like to receive the monthly update, you can do so by visiting us at aproundtable.org, thepublicsquare.com, or giving us a call at 1-800-522-VOTE, 1-800-522-8683.
Yes, and the phone app as well. You can get it on the app. Look for it in your app store. Totally free of charge. Not going to data mine you. So it's there for you. And with that, we'll have to call a timeout for today. Thanks to everyone who listened. And we'll see you next time when we gather around the table again for more of The Public Square.
The Public Square is a broadcast service of the American Policy Roundtable.